Ladies and gentlemen, the world needs more troublemakers. To tell us why, please shake your phones in the air and welcome on stage writer and activist Jillian Reilly.
Go do good. That's why I came to South Africa in 1993, to go do good. To witness the end of apartheid, the election of Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, to participate in the transition to democracy. Friends back home admired my courage, and neighbors praised the nobility of my efforts. It was easy to feel good about doing good for me then. And as I conducted voter education in prisons, as I interviewed victims of human rights abuses in Thokoza, as I facilitated workshop with NGOs in the Eastern Cape, I felt brave and noble. And even though I didn't admit it to those neighbors and friends back home, I felt really good about myself. Principled, righteous, I felt powerful. It was really easy to feel good about doing good in the mid-90s in South Africa, when the possibilities for change felt at once endless and yet somehow within reach. In 1997, I was offered a job to run an HIV/AIDS project in Zimbabwe. And even though I'd never been to Zimbabwe, and I knew very little about HIV/AIDS, I jumped at the chance. After all, I figured it had to be pretty easy to do good in the middle of what was then the world's biggest HIV/AIDS epidemic. It was only several years later, after millions of dollars had been spent and countless training workshops facilitated, that I started asking questions. Questions about whether doing good was really so simple after all. Questions about whether I was really so brave, after all. I will never forget a group of women in Chitungwiza, outside of Harare. 15 of them sitting dutifully in a circle, all of them married, their heads wrapped, long skirts, wearing crisp white t-shirts emblazoned with the name of the HIV/AIDS NGO that I ran. They had been given those t-shirts when they graduated from the condom negotiation training that we'd run for them several months earlier. Training that was intended to help them not only figure out how to use condoms, but perhaps more importantly, how to get their husbands to want to use condoms. It was called Women's Empowerment. And it was, and still is, very much in fashion in social development. The conventional wisdom was that you couldn't change an African man, so you would try to change women. You would empower them. And hopefully by doing so, in this case, you would lower the HIV/AIDS epidemic rate. There were millions of dollars flowing into Zimbabwe for just this kind of women's empowerment, and so there must have been groups like this dotted all over the country. On that day, they had met as part of a 6-monthly progress report to share stories and lessons learned about their experiences trying to apply their negotiation skills in real life. And I sat watching them proudly. When I'd arrived, they'd come to me, smiles and warm greetings, thanking me profusely for the training that I had offered them. And I listened for a while as they shared their stories in sort of fractured whispers of how they were trying to speak to their husbands. Jacques Pressa, they said, it was difficult, but God willing, one day soon progress would be made against this big HIV/AIDS epidemic. And then I noticed that one particularly young woman was crying. She was completely bent over, her body was shaking, and she was wiping her nose on the sleeve of her fancy new t-shirt. The progress reports had to stop when her sobbing grew so loud. And eventually she lifted her head to tell us that she'd been savagely beaten the night before for raising the issue of condoms with her husband. She talked about it that night because she was so desperate to come into this meeting with good news of progress. She wanted to share that with me. But he told her that if she talked about condoms or HIV again, he would kill her. There was silence in the room until one woman, and then another, admitted that they too had received threats, intimidations, and beating. Until they admitted that negotiating condoms was very dangerous, and that empowerment could be deadly. There was really nothing else to say. So the leader of the group decided to break for tea. There were warm samosas that day for them for tea. I sat in my chair with no appetite at all. In fact, I felt sick. Not only because of what I just heard, but because I'd known for weeks, if not months, that this so-called women's empowerment was not only ineffective, but utterly inauthentic. I knew that it was cowardly to ask these women to have the conversations with their husbands that we were unwilling to have. I knew that instead of teaching women how to put condoms on men, we should have been having honest conversations with men about why they didn't want to use them in the first place. And I knew that if you gave a poor woman a t-shirt and a hot snack, she'd attend any training you had to offer. She would make you feel good. But I had done nothing. I'd done nothing. Because women's empowerment was what my donor was funding. Because it was fashionable. It was even easy. I knew I could get those groups of women together without a lot of problem. And I could write beautiful reports about hundreds, even thousands of Zimbabwean women being empowered. I wanted to be professional and efficient, and I wanted to be well-liked and polite. And mostly, I worried that if I raised a dissenting voice, if I caused trouble, the millions might stop flowing. I realized in that instant that that sense of bravery and nobility that I once felt, those principles and that righteousness that I once possessed without question, had been replaced by shame. I left my job several months later and have spent every day since then trying to work out what real bravery looks like. Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela. In the weeks after his death, I was reminded that Rolihlahla means troublemaker in Xhosa. And that's what he was, after all. Principled and passionate, alternatively revered and reviled, he has become a symbol for moral courage, but at his essence, he was a troublemaker. If only I was a troublemaker when it mattered most. This country was created by troublemakers, and if it is to realize its promise, we are all going to need to find a little bit of troublemaker within each of us. It will require us to identify our values, our beliefs, and our principles, and let them lead us, even if it's into difficult territory. It will require us to be benevolent, yes, but most of all, brave. Brave enough to challenge those in power, to challenge conventional thinking and orthodox approaches, to never stop asking difficult questions instead of accepting or producing simplistic answers. It will require us to be led by our consciences, fueled by a sense of compassion for others, and emboldened by courage. The courage to never be silent or silenced, to speak our truths even when our voices shake, and maybe to help other people speak their truths as well. It will require us to accept that not only rhinos and children deserve our collective public attention. Abused women and out-of-work men, teachers trying to teach without textbooks, mothers trying to raise their children without clean water. They don't deserve our pity, but they would benefit from our passion. The passion of our creativity, the passion of our collective voice, speaking to them. And yes, sometimes speaking with them. It will require us to accept the simple reality that doing good cannot and should not always feel good. Because there are no feel-good responses to injustice and inequality, only courageous ones. And who among us has the courage to address them? I don't think the world needs more saviors. I think it needs more troublemakers. So yes, please, go do good. Go and make some trouble. Thank you.